Or sometimes cards if you like. For notes? Yeah, I do too. Just in cards.
Hi, and welcome to another segment of KISS. That is Keep It Simple, Sir. Keep it simple, keep it thanks of God, keep it simple. We're glad to come to your home and wherever you may be again today, whether by YouTube or television. We have a great program for you today, and we want you to get on the phone, call a friend and neighbor, tell you this is an historic moment that we're about to bring to you, information that you don't want to miss. We have some of our guests here today, as we have directly across from me, Mr. Richard Austin and also Mr. Floyd Johnson. Praise God. And we'll be talking about the Methodist Church and a few other things that I'm sure you're going to find quite interesting. So starting out today, we're going to start with Mr. Austin, let him introduce himself and tell you a little bit about himself. And after that, we'll go to Mr. Johnson, and then we get started with our production today. God bless you.
Thank you, Bishop Norton. It's good to be here. It's been a long time since I've taken part in the media here in Dayton, Ohio, even though, as my friend Floyd Johnson told the gentleman on the way in, we had something to do with starting this whole process in Citizens Cable Corporation many years ago. But we're not here today to talk about that. We're here to talk about the history of the AME Zion Church, which means African, which the church is basically people from African descent. Methodists, they follow the Methodist form of religion. Episcopal, meaning that they're governed by bishops. And Zion was added to the church in 1812 to distinguish this part of Methodism from the AME Church, which was founded by Richard Allen in Philadelphia in 1776, I think, just before the United States was founded. And the AME Zion Church was founded in New York City by Bishop Varick and others, following their departure from the St. John's British Methodist Church. And the Zion was added at that time to distinguish the two churches. They've been along separate parallel tracks for over 200 years. I have here with me the 200th anniversary booklet of the AME Zion Church, which is from 1796 to 1992. Talks about reflecting, rejoicing, reclaiming, and renewing. And the church has been a stalwart in the community, both the community at large and particularly in the black community. Its headquarters, the corporate headquarters, is in Charlotte, North Carolina. The strong bed of the church is in North Carolina. The church has some 3 million members worldwide. There are 12, is governed by 12 bishops. We're located in Africa, England, India, United States of America, and in the Caribbean. And I could go on and on, Bishop, but I know you probably have some specific questions. I grew up in the AME Zion Church.
Yes.
I tell people I have had more than one wife. I've been to a lot of schools. I have done a lot of things, but I've only been a member of one church all of my life, and that's the AME Zion Church.
All right.
I've gone from being an altar boy in the church here in Dayton at St. Paul to pastor in the Beulah AME Zion Church at St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands for some 20 years. And I'm now what's called a superannuated minister, a minister who has done their labor and has chose not to be in the active pastorate, so I'm retired, but I'm still an ordained minister in the Church of God.
Yes, we never retire.
We never retire.
Dr. Johnson.
And I'm a Baptist. I was a Baptist, you know, by inheritance, really, but from Jackson, Mississippi. And the history that he gave you of the AME Zion Church, I think it's kind of a blend from the Baptists. They used to ask us the first thing in the neighborhood, where is your church home? That was a common thing. So what I'm going to chat about is just 3 phases of American history that was suppressed because of Jim Crow. And that was the period from 1619 until 1776, which was called the antebellum period. What we call America now is just colonies, 13 colonies. And slavery was the standard order. And then the period that after the antebellum period was the period in which there was struggle and there was a civil war. And at the end of the Civil War, we had Reconstruction, where they attempted to rectify an error that was made in 1776. It wasn't an error, it was an intention for the Constitution of the United States was adopted by the Continental Congress, who was represented by the planter class. These are people who owned the plantation, owned slaves, wrote the Constitution, and in the Constitution, the first preamble was that the country was dedicated to the proposition that all men were created equal. But in the same document, turned around and negated that. They had about 4 million slaves. We're descendants of those slaves who were, their rights were taken away because they took 5 slaves to make 3 people under the Constitution. So that was a contradiction. And that's the issues that we're dealing with right today. And then Reconstruction, where they put money into the hands of former slaves, and we could vote, and they tried to rectify it. And then a long period of Jim Crow. But since this program is Keep It Simple, young man, we're not going to talk about all of them, but I might want to just chat about some couple individual cases under those 3 phases. And the reason I do that is I'm a retired educator. I taught social studies for elementary school and history, American history, geography, but all of that information about the African Americans who are now occupants of this land, who have multiplied to about 13% of this population, was suppressed under Jim Crow. So I'm going to just chat about Jim Crow and some persons who are very important to try to overcome Jim Crow. And that parallels with the history of the church, which Attorney Austin will talk about a little bit.
You know, and I know that's what I was going to introduce, that both of you guys were leaders or president of the NAACP at one time.
That's correct.
So, and also you've been educators in the city and about, and civic leaders as well.
That's right.
So the information you have, of course, and the people may not know, the Methodist Church based on is the reach out, basically. I was thinking about the beliefs, the basic beliefs of the Methodist Church is that the Bible is the inspired word of God, sin, salvation through Jesus Christ, sanctification, sacraments, free will, and social justice. And understanding the word Methodist means the person devoted to or laying great stress on the method, capitalize a member of one of the denominations deriving from the Wesley Revival in the Church of England, having Arminian doctrine, and in the U.S., modified Episcopal polity, and stressing personal and social morality. And I know we come to the point where we're talking about the African part, and the point is Dr. Austin, I always call him different, Dr. Austin, shared with us some of the things that how it come to the African American and the reason the African American church was born. Now, you can correct me, I also believe in understanding that the founder, Richard Allen, I believe the first church was called Mother Bethel African Methodist Church.
Right.
The Episcopal
in
Church.
Philadelphia, yeah, the
In
AME.
Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So it's so much, and I don't want to miss anything, if I must say, because I know Dr. Johnson here has been telling me so many beautiful things going on and how Dunbar High School got started before. He was telling me so much. I said,
Yeah,
Dr. Johnson, there's no way in the world I can cover all of these.
Okay.
So,
Bishop, let me try to dove a few things in now that I'm getting a better understanding of what we're trying to do today. I think we need to talk about John and Charles Wesley,
okay.
the founders of the Methodist tradition, denomination. The Wesley brothers were Anglican priests, but they believed in the salvation according to accepting Jesus Christ, that it was free to all men, and they were abolitionists. They were anti-slavery. Matter of fact, you people in this area are familiar with the name Wilberforce, the community. They were contemporaries of William Wilberforce, who was a British abolitionist, and he was a member of Parliament. And because of William Wilberforce's efforts in the British Parliament, slavery was abolished in the British Commonwealth or Empire in I think it was around
1835.
1835. Okay, that we were still having slavery in the United States at that time. That's why when I was telling this story to Floyd, how my church or the denomination in the U.S. Virgin Islands came about, it was the British or the Methodist preachers, following the Wesleyan doctrine of anti-slavery, preached against slavery in the United States Virgin Islands, which prior to it being the United States Virgin Islands, it was the Danish West Indies. It belonged to the country of Denmark. It was part of the Denmark church, at least the Denmark authority, and the main church there was Lutheran. Was the Lutheran church. So in order to have a church in any of Denmark's territory, you had to have the blessings of the church. The planters in the Danish West Indies were opposed to the Methodist preachers, who were street preachers, and they were preaching against slavery. They were opposed to that, so the king banished Methodism from the Danish West Indies. And I was suggesting to him, if you go to any of the Caribbean countries, the former British Commonwealth countries, Antigua, Barbados, St. Kitts, you will find like a Christ Methodist Church that goes back to the 1700s. You won't find that in the United States Virgin Islands. The reason you won't find that is because Methodism was banned in the United States Virgin Islands. It was not reestablished until 1917, when the United States bought the Danish West Indies and renamed it the United States Virgin Islands. And at that time, a preacher from Barbados who had come to the United States and studied under Bishop Allen, I think, no, it wasn't Allen, it was another bishop that had the North Carolina territory, and he sent him back to St. Croix to plant a AME Zion church. And in 1917 is when the Beulah Church was established, and this was our 95th anniversary. And the Beulah Church is the oldest, what we call non-traditional church in the United States Virgin Islands. The traditional churches were Catholic, Moravian, Lutheran, and Anglican. The Moravians, they were not anti-slavery, but they did not. They would teach the slavery. The Catholics kind of stayed out of it. The Anglicans kind of stayed out of it. So the Methodists wanted to abolish it. So those four denominations were able to stay there. The Methodists were banished. It wasn't until 1917 that the Beulah AME Zion Church was reestablished in the Virgin Islands, that a church other than the Big Four were allowed to exist in the United States Virgin. Now you have everything, holiness, 7-day, Baptist, everything. But at that time, and the Beulah Church celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2017. We had to put it off for a year because there was a hurricane that year, and our bishop came down, and we had a big celebration in 2018, which is the year that I retired from the pastorate.
And so it's all basically coming under the same umbrella of faith. Of course, people make this division when it comes to denomination. We're talking about the same God.
Exactly.
We're talking about the same. We're talking about Wesley. We're talking about Martin Luther. You mentioned Lutheran, Wesley.
Calvin,
all of it come right on down the line. And even though the separatism, well, even Christ got angry with some of the leaders in this time, how they tried to change the original way of the word it should have been. So it had nothing changed. What Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. Men are yet trying to change the thing that, but the beautiful thing that I think you were talking about, that the AMA was the first.
AME Zion.
AME. The AME
and AME Zion
was the first organized church here in the United States of African descent for African men,
Right,
Americans,
yeah.
because they were not allowed.
Right.
There was they did
have the
not,
service.
the last thing in the world
They
that the
formed
Europeans
themselves,
wanted
yeah,
was the Africans, slaves,
to be organized.
to read. And the common book to learn how to read
Was the Bible.
was the Bible.
Yes.
They kept it away from us. The Methodists allowed slaves to attend their churches, but some places they had to sit up in the balcony.
Yeah.
They couldn't sit down with the rest of them.
Okay.
And the Methodists built up till they had 100,000 slaves who were members of the Methodist Church. And in 1840, I'm a Christian CME, Christian Methodist now.
Yeah.
But in 1840, when they
It was
formed,
a colored Methodist.
left the
Okay.
It was colored Methodist. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey,
Change it from
we-
color
we-
to
we
Christian.
became
Yeah.
a
Okay.
colored Methodist, right?
Yeah, after the Civil War,
Yeah.
the Southern Methodist Church, which broke away from the Northern, which was the British part, they broke away because of slavery. And after the Civil War, they said, well, we'll set up a church for black people themselves. So they set up the Colored Methodist
Colored
Church.
Methodist.
That's
So that
which
makes me a-
in the 1950s came the Christian Methodist. But now we got to be very careful about how religion played into the establishment of the United States.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, see, they, the Puritans and all of these people who came to the United States for religious freedom, that was for white people.
Right, right.
That was not for the indigenous people that they found here already.
Okay.
See, because they didn't discover America. America had already been discovered.
Yes.
There were thousands of people in America.
Yes.
Right.
So this is why the United States is having the problems that it's having now.
Absolutely.
Because it has never reckoned with the original sin that it has been involved in.
Yes.
Annihilating the natives, the Native Americans,
Right.
Yes.
annihilating the Native Americans,
Yes.
and holding and subjugating a race of people for 400 years.
Yes. You know,
And until America deals with that, we're going to have all of these problems that we're having.
you know, I'm glad you said it because a lot of time I talk about that. Until recently, have many began to refer to Native Americans or the
Right.
Native people.
Yes.
Because Columbus, and it's a funny thing how sometimes falsehood could stimulate and go on and on and on. He thought he was going to India.
Yeah.
I said to somebody he was looking for a shortcut
Right.
to bring spices back.
Right.
And when he landed so forth here, he didn't know this country was even here. He said, I found a shortcut to India. Those must have been the Indians. That thing stuck
Right.
to the point, even some of the descendants referred to themselves as Indians.
Right.
They were never Indians.
Right.
So when he said the native people that were here,
Yeah.
that's important a lot of times to realize.
Right.
And it was the Moors was here before Columbus got here.
But they came over from another area.
Yes.
Columbus came from the east, they came from the north.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I understand they came on longboats. They didn't have big ships to come in on
They
Right.
didn't have
and survive.
Yeah.
Right, right, right. So that's the key.
Revisionist
But we have
history
always
has been put to us in such a way that, and even now, people say, well, we can't teach children or in our schools about 1619. That's making white people feel bad. And so if the truth makes you feel bad, then you just need to feel bad.
Okay.
But you're not going to reckon with the problems of America until we deal with what Du Bois said back at the turn of the 20th century, until we deal with the problem of race.
right,
Just like we tried to take the hyphen out of Negro Americans, Black Americans, African Americans, and be full Americans, and we can't take the hyphen out of it until people stop seeing black people differently as other Americans. So they see us as a hyphen American. And until we can pass that, America is not going to be free. Until everybody's free, nobody's going to be free.
that's where Americans all have been contaminated. You know, we blended blood, blended a lot of things, but the principle, we have always, the three of us and all the descendants of people who look like us, has been a problem. We didn't create the problem. The problem was imposed on a country because of the selfish needs and interests of the planters who wanted to harvest the fields and send their goods back to Europe and take all the money and live lavishly while these people that looked like us slaved in the fields, took care of their households, raised their children, and also bore their children. Because when you look at these planters and look at the founders, you can start with Jefferson, who had his family in the big house, and Sally Hemings in the little house. Sally Hemings, so Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders, they're African Americans who are descendants of one of the founders, but he put something on there, and I think Attorney Austin can talk about a little bit about what Jefferson has on that memorial about what's going to happen when finally the African people become educated and see what they did.
And Brother Floyd is talking about the planters. It's not only the planters of the South. It was the banks, it was the insurance companies in Wall Street and New York, Connecticut, Boston, Philadelphia, and the shippers. Everybody profited from slavery, free labor of black people, but black people.
Right.
You know, that was the biggest problem I was saying for years ago. A lot of times you didn't hear this kind of talk, but I used to say, look, the main thing wasn't a human thing that reason the North fought the South, but it was a financial thing.
Yes.
Because they had free labor, of course,
Yes.
the Confederate dollar
Yes.
was worth more than the Yankee dollar.
Yes.
Because it was a monetary thing.
Yes.
That's what the Civil War really was about. And correct me if
The money, you're correct. The money. They say follow the money.
Yes. And
They
so
always say, if you want to find out what the conflict, follow the money.
Yes, yes. And that's what the competitiveness is.
Yeah.
That's where we leave Christ out of our lives. We leave a lot of social normal things out because it's about the paper.
right.
The young people say the paper.
Right.
The paper trail is more important.
Right.
And that has caused the demise of us for centuries. Centuries that happened. But in America, we understand what you're talking about. We're talking about something also, the church, we was talking about the church. The church was a form of education, period.
Right.
I remember my parents and their grandparents, that's where they got the education first, in the church. That was the schoolhouse versus church.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, what in Africa, every native group, you know, they call them, Europe called them tribes, but every native group had a homeland. They had a home, and they had a chief in Nigeria, I think the Oba, he said. The Oba Ife, that's the king of that particular, if they went home, like we from Dayton, Ohio, we said going home, my family went back to Mississippi. But if you were in Lagos or Ghana and one of the African countries, they say, we're going home, they'd be going back to their village. Okay, so in the village, when we came to America as slaves, that's one of the things that we kept an attachment to when you talk to people who are descendants of slaves, and really, we haven't really, the slavery issue is really not dead as we've talked about, but they ask you, where's your church home? That becomes our village. Everybody was referred to, when we came to Ohio, the first thing my parents did was found a church home, Mount Calvary Church.
Okay.
I was a Baptist, and when I married, now I'm a CME because my wife was a CME. I followed my wife, Judith, and her family to the CME church because I was going to a Baptist church and she was going to a Methodist. Didn't make sense on Sunday morning. We were married, so I gave in.
She must be
So I
good.
became a Methodist, and then but I studied and teach Sunday school until the coronavirus issue for 4 years in the Methodist church.
Okay.
And it's a connectional church.
Yeah, right.
So when the virus came, I connected with them over the internet.
Okay.
So we still have Sunday school and preaching from Jackson, down the headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee.
Yes.
So the CME has a unique history paralleling what the AME Zion has, you know, but it was just another division of Methodism,
Yes.
which he's kind of really laid out. And that's really why when he came home and he called me, and I was really ducking everybody because I didn't want to talk to anybody because of the virus thing. And he just showed up.
Yes.
And we sat down, and I said, you know what, he has a story that needs to be told, especially about the next topic, and that's the history of Dunbar High School. And I hope he'll share that with you now, because when I was in the 5th grade when I came to Dayton, but my sister, the oldest sister who was still at home, she came and went straight to Roosevelt, which is an integrated school. I don't know what difference between integration and segregation or whatever the two terminology. He knows the legal technical definition between them. But she was in the school, but luckily for me, I went to a Jim Crow segregated school. So I didn't have the conflict that she had at Roosevelt because I went to Wagaman. And they had the top flight teachers there because the cream of the crop taught black in the black schools under Jim Crow. And I loved it.
Yes.
But once I left Wagaman at 13 and went to Roosevelt, it was like, then I became the invisible man.
Okay.
And there are writers who wrote about Juneteenth and about the invisible man that we were between 1920 and 1950. But you want to share a little bit about that?
Well, you know, one thing I was going to share before I moved to that, because that's something we wanted to talk about, the school. And since Dunbar is right here in the city and a lot of information, I'm sure some of those will be watching today. But I look at a lot of times, one of our biggest divisor, when you was mentioning about tribal, and I look back over the years, even tribal division in Africa, and the same division with the Native American, that had been the fall because they never could come together because it was divided tribal. Family division. In fact, when I was in Europe, a lot of times I had friends that was in Somalia and some friends that was in Ghana, but you look at me and say, hey, what's going on, man, in Ghana? You look at me and say, that's another country, man. I don't want to talk about it. That same divisor amongst our people as a whole has caused the downfall. Whether it was the Native Americans, was the Native Africans, was the Native, also the ones that went to Aborigine in South America.
When you say downfall, what do you mean?
The division.
Oh, just the division.
The division between, because of a tribal difference.
But because we're using that tribalism, but there's also what's called a balkanization of Africa. Meaning that the European nations who colonized, they said at one time the sun never set on the Union Jack. The Europeans, England, France, Spain, Portugal, all formed colonies in Africa for the same reason that the slaves were brought to this country, to exploit the natural resources.
Yes.
You'll see there's a little clip that's coming out on the internet now. It said, everything has been taken from Africa, but nobody's given Africa anything back.
Yes.
But that balkanization, the Ghana people were colonized by the British. But then you go to Guinea, it was colonized by the French. You look at Liberia, that was a colony of America. You go down to Angola, that was colonized by the Spanish.
But do you think they capitalized on the division of the people themselves, or they wouldn't be able to, you know the old saying we say, together we stand and divide
follow the money, the money. If you're in Ghana, they raise cocoa, so the cocoa and the coffee bean. And they had a coffee bean and a cocoa market, just like you had an oil cartel, there's a coffee cartel. Everybody wanted to control some thing that was grown in Africa. And when you don't want to commingle that because you'd have to share the money, follow the money. And that creates political issues there.
Well, we tell you that this social and political and the whole thing in a big nutshell, right? But I want Dr. Alston to get what he's trying to share. I know it's
no, I don't, because this is too. I mean, to talk about the founding of the Dunbar High School is a separate discussion, because where we're leaving,
yes,
there's still so much we could talk about.
Oh yes,
so
yes, it is.
We'll just follow your lead. I was suggesting to Floyd that the establishment of the Dunbar High School was a very controversial matter when it started. It was Dunbar High School at that time. The people who were coming to Dayton from the South mainly were congregating in central Dayton, which is what they called then Edgemont and mostly West Dayton. There was one high school on West Dayton, that was Roosevelt High School. Okay. So the blacks started going to Roosevelt, and Roosevelt was a segregated school within a segregated building. Right. Blacks didn't go into the swimming pool. They had separate proms. Everything was separate. This
My
was
mother
attended. Okay. So they were going to build Dunbar High School specifically for blacks, where they wouldn't have to go to Roosevelt. The blacks in Dayton who were opposed to segregation were against it. So that this causes a real problem in the city of Dayton, and the NAACP was right in the middle of it, because they wanted to have blacks educated, but they were not for segregated education. So actually, there was a compromise. Dunbar was supposed to be a junior high school. There were no junior high schools in the city of Dayton then, but they built it, and it was going to be a junior high school, 7 through 9. And then when they opened it, it got so conglomerated that they made it a high school. They hired a person who happened to hail from St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. And this is what really made me so interested, because I went to the Virgin Islands and I found his family, and I got a chance to know them. But before I'd even got to the Virgin Islands, I had held this person in high esteem because he was such a leader here in the Dayton community. Frederick McFarland was his name. Dr. McFarland was his name. He didn't come here as Dr. McFarland, but he got his doctorate from Harvard while he was here in Dayton. So Dr. McFarland was the first principal at Dunbar High School, and he brought a lot of his people from the Virgin Islands with him. Clarence Francois, did you ever hear Clarence?
I knew. Yes.
Who was the maestro of music.
Yes.
I studied under him in the Glee Club.
Yes.
Stewart, Carlos Stewart. Both of those gentlemen are from Frederickstead, which in the Virgin Islands they call it the Freedom City. Okay. They brought, and McFarland brought him here to Dunbar, and he brought other people like Rice and all of the people Bob Rice, that he brought there. Them people had master's degrees. Okay. Miss Stokes, Miss Ross, Mr. Ewings. Yes. Because blacks, you could just work in the post office if you got a degree, or you'd have to work in the foundry or teach in the black schools. Yes. So McFarland had set up what we would call a Lexium or an academy. Dunbar was one of the best schools in the state of Ohio in terms of learning. So this is what caused the problem. There was a group that felt that McFarland was getting too black in this thing because they were all for integration. And at that time, they even had Du Bois in here and talk. And see, McFarland was a follower of Garvey. Okay. You know, see, back then, Garvey had the Starship Line, and his thing was blacks do our own thing. Okay. And McFarland, being a Caribbean person too, he had that same idea. This is what, I'm going to read this. This was one of the complaints that a group called the Frontier Club had made to the Dayton Board of Education against McFarland. They wanted him fired. They said he indoctrinates false sense of race pride. Dunbar students are made unduly conscious of race and have an inordinate vanity of their own superiority. Now see, I'll tell you, I went to Dunbar.
What year you said that was approximate?
No, look, that went all the way up to, I started Dunbar in 1959. I went to Weaver. I never had a black teacher until I was in the a black teacher until I was in the 8th grade, because Weaver School right there on Howe and whatever street it was made, even though it was right in the black community, blacks couldn't teach there.
Okay.
So I went to Dunbar because it had, in my family who had come up from the South, they kind of felt that, you know, we need to do our own thing. So all of my family went to Dunbar. When I got there, it was clear to me that what they taught us was you got to be better. David Albritton in track,
Yes.
Miss Stokes in English,
Yes.
Miss Havecock in world peace,
I know her.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can't shuffle and jive. You got to be for real. And if they instilled upon us that we were somebody, and that you can't just be mediocre, and even if you're gonna go and sweep the floor, you got to sweep it right.
Yes.
And if we're gonna move this whole black race up, we gotta move everybody up together. But you're gonna be judged out in that world as a heightened black American. You're not gonna be judged as an American, so you gotta present yourself with the highest possible qualities.
Yeah.
Now that's what they taught at Dunbar up until 1961. I don't know what they're teaching now or what they taught after 1961, because I mean our community has just gone to the dogs as far as I'm concerned.
But it filters down. A lot of that values filter down. I'm standing here smiling because some of the same teacher you're talking about I had.
Well,
I run into Albritton.
Yes,
track and all that.
Dave was
so a lot of that. A lot of those things, the values are there. I don't think they stop. And it's more or less that seemed like it was a forced stop. You know how psychology is, rewards and punishment.
Right.
Those that, as the reader said, those that was trying to instill self-esteem, they were sort of stop that.
Stop from doing it, okay.
Hit the wrong key.
Because I don't know what happened. I left Dunbar in 61 to go to Central State. Then I left Central in 65 to go to Howard Law. I came back and studied at Ohio State Law School, and then I got my degree. I tell people I took the black flight, Dunbar, Central, Wilberforce, Dunbar, Central, and Howard, and I was neither the less for it. And I was gone from Dayton, so I really didn't know all of this, what was happening, and how the whole educational process had changed.
The values of the leaders did not change. As I said, they were being forced, even when they said to that time in the latter years when they were telling the children to call 911 on their parents. In other words, taking away the credit for those that in authority that was training them right. We talk about the Black Panthers. A lot of people don't realize they were starting leadership classroom. It was not the violence that people see at a later time. It was actually, back again, education, the mind. And those others that came of interest come in and did things and blame them for it. But I can say for a fact that was not the way it was. On the original way it started. You mentioned Clarence Francois. Well, we got a chance to talk with him because we share the same name. Also, and he was also a teacher, like with Mr. McFarland. He looked at me a lot of time. He said to me, he said, "You know my name, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, CJ." And then so we identified, we locked in with CJ and Clarence Francois. "Where you been?" He asked me, because I played the band rather than the choir. And then when I got, from the band to the choir, well, that's another thing.
So did you go to
Dunbar? Yes.
What year did you finish?
I'm not leaving it alone. I left it alone.
See, because I'm going to find out who these Nortons are.
Yes.
I'm going to go back into it. Because I'm going to get into it.
Actually, our family come from Louisiana. We come from Louisiana, and a lot of the Nortons, the Banks, the Nelsons, the Jones, so it's a whole
family.
That was our village.
That was our village. In fact, we lived in the same neighborhood. Dr. Johnson here.
He was a very, very, very young man.
Yes.
Very young man.
And the thing is, the things that you talked about and we talked about, it shocked you a lot of times to see the understanding, because a lot of time I think today we even separate ourselves. What did I say? We separate ourselves even today. That Jim Crow type of thing you said, the lighter, the darker, the older, the younger, the generation different. I was thinking earlier, everybody have a time on this earth. And the thing is not, and the older separate from the younger separate from the old. That younger person may have only 40 years to do what God had claimed him to do.
Right.
Whereas another one lived 80 or 90 years. Right. That is on a clock that God had for them to do.
Right.
If that young guy hold back from what God give him to do, is because he's 40, he's not 80.
Right.
He failed to fulfill what he's called to be done. Even God told Jeremiah, I knew you before I formed you in the womb.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
I knew you, I have already ordained you to be something.
Right.
Why would you allow something else to hinder
And all the rest of us he knows.
that I have set for you to do?
Yeah.
And they say, oh boy, wait till you get a little older to do that. It may not be on that time clock for that young man.
Right, exactly.
And that one older man sometimes might taking him to do what God would do. I think, and I know I'm talking fast because there's a lot here, and I know I'm talking to religious people, so you understand what I'm talking about. Like Moses was ready as a Pharaoh king, trained. But why did he have to go 40 years? Because he wasn't able to do it God's way yet.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to depend on God and trust. And that's the thing I feel that we deter off the path when we quit trusting
Right.
and praying
Right.
in God. And that division, that's what got us in trouble now.
Right.
Now, Brother Norton, look, let me tell you something else to get off of this. Not to get off of it, but to put it back.
Yes. Perspectives.
McFarland, he felt that at that point in time, this is in the 1930s and so forth, that blacks, by being separated and being taught and to excel, that it was what our race should do. Even Floyd and I, we talked about that dichotomy between Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver and so forth, and how one had, and Du Bois. So this is the interesting perspective. I was involved, I was local counsel. I'm an attorney also. As a matter of fact, I got recognized for 50 years at the bar, not the drinking bar, but the Ohio bar, about 2 years ago. I was local counsel for the Dayton school desegregation case. Nate Jones was the general counsel for the NAACP, and he called me and said, Richard, some people in Dayton want to bring a lawsuit. Will you work with us? Okay. So I was the local counsel. I signed it and took it down to the federal court and filed it. Now, what the strategy was at that time, after Brown v. Board of Education, which was an NAACP-led case, that separate but equal is unconstitutional and inherently unequal. And that was another point that I wanted to mention about Floyd. He said something about, about slaves. He was talking about rights, and I would say slaves never had rights. So slaves never had rights, and it was reaffirmed that blacks never had rights in Plessy v. Ferguson in I think that was a late 1900 case, which stated that a slave had no rights that a white man had to honor. Okay, and Plessy v. Ferguson stayed the law until 1954 in Brown v. Board of Education, which has overturned the whole concept of separate but equal. Okay, so at that time, they held that with all deliberate speed, we need to desegregate these schools. And all deliberate speed, that at that time meant no speed at all. They just don't move. So when we started filing these school desegregation cases, the concept was, since separate but equal is not equal, and blacks are going to get the old school books, they're going to get the poor this, they're going to get cheated in terms of the economics on it. Now, Nate Jones and Thurgood Marshall, I sat under them, and they explained this strategy to me, why the NAACP was pushing for integration. That until we get a black kid sitting next to a white kid in the chemistry lab, that separate but equal is not going to work. And if we then, when they got that broken down, that we got integration, and they're still going to try to do it on a separate but equal, we have to bring about what was ended up calling forced integration, and busting and all of that. But that was not our concept. Our concept was to make sure that we could not have de facto segregation where they could spend the money unequally. So in order to try to get the money spent equally in black schools or black neighborhoods and so forth, we have to put it. They're not going to do it. The people that are spending the money are just inherently not going to do it.
Right.
They're not going to do it. So we have to set the black kid next to the white kid. Now that was the theory.
No.
Right.
That was the theory.
Yeah.
So
And some of us complaining, why we got to be bused? You know that?
Yeah.
It's always that.
You got to wrap it. You're
Not
going to wrap it up, but let
understanding.
me say this. What he was covering, in most cases, the kids would sit around a table, and it's what they read in the book. We lived that.
Yes.
When he mentioned about this, when I started teaching, Superintendent Robert French was in charge. My parents said, why do all these people's names, all these on our books, and their book raggedy? When I started, I said, you're right. I said, he said, well, you need to go. I said, he's not going to listen to me, but the parents were. My parents at Edison Elementary School, Miss Pope, one of the daughters, just texted me all the time now, led the group, went to the board, and told Dr. French that we need new books at Edison. He sent a dump truck into the playground. Principal Van Deventer, he said, Floyd, the board's got your books out there in the yard. Send some boys out there to bring them in. They dumped them. This is in 1963. So it's not what I read in the book, and some of the stuff we just glossed over.
Yes.
This is what's called African folklore, passing it down, and I hope that those who get to see this tape will really follow up on a lot of the stuff, and especially with this McFarland, because I followed Booker T. Washington, but this is closer to home because I lived it.
Yes.
I went to Roosevelt, a desegregated school,
Yes.
and I didn't really begin to really get my African education until I went to Central State, which is in Wilberforce, Ohio, and I said, oh my God. He talked about Francois music. My music teacher at Roosevelt was a German named Dietrich.
Okay.
My chemistry teacher was a German. My biology, I was getting a good European education. But what about the black people? What about the ex-slaves? I had to learn that when I went to Central State. I loved it. Especially the pretty girls.
But you said, and in Roosevelt, Waterman, did you know Waterman? Not Waterman, what's his name? Woolen.
Woolen was
the football player.
Yes.
What was Willem's name?
Gordy was the football coach.
Willem.
Woolen was the basketball coach.
No, not the coach, the runner. You talking about the player or the coach?
I'm thinking about the coach. He was a teacher over there. He was a teacher over to Roosevelt.
Okay.
I spent the class there with him once. And like I said, cross the barrier, and said like the end of the line, but some of the same things you were talking about was all filtered down with us. When we got books, there was a bunch of names in the book.
In the book already.
But it was nobody in the school that you attended.
Yeah, right.
So
it wasn't a new book.
Right. It's a lot of those things, and people make it sound as if it was years ago. But
that's what he was saying. They were not going to do right. They were not going to do right. I mean, that's what we got. So it's kind of meshed. All of this stuff come together, and that's why, as you say, God decides all of this stuff.
Yes.
The fact that we're just sitting here, this story needed to be told.
Yes. Let me give an example before we quit, because I told Floyd this. I finished Central in '65 with an education degree. I did my student teaching at Wilbur Wright High School and got an A in student teaching. And that student teaching, I taught one black student. When I went to apply at the Dayton Public Schools for a teaching job in secondary education, social studies, which I'd finished with honors at Central State, I talked to Royer, Homer Royer, who was assistant superintendent at that time. And he knew me because he was involved in track, and I'd run track for Dunbar. He said, Dick, hey, I'm glad that you're applying. Now let me ask Field, Smart, and Cummings what they got, and I'll get back with you. Now what does that say?
Now who were those people?
Field was the principal at Dunbar, Cummings was the principal at Roosevelt, and Smart was the principal at Rolfe. Dayton had 10 public high schools then, but he's going to limit my ability to get a job to the 3 black schools, and I never taught a black student.
Okay.
But he's only going to consider me
To consider you.
he's only going to consider me to teach at a black school.
You know the significance of what he just said?
Yes. The thing, it hasn't really changed, to be honest. It's just different ways to cover.
It's just plain overt. I mean, it wasn't blatant. I mean, it wasn't hidden. It was blatant. Just blatant segregation. There's 10 high schools. He's not going to ask the principal at Belmont or Wilbur Wright or Kaiser or go through some process to see whether there are social studies teachers positions available at the 10 high schools. He's going to ask Phil, Smart, and Cummings to give me a job.
Yes, and I understand, and what you're saying, we sometimes we think it's a big gap. It's not a big gap.
Yeah, it's 1965.
In 1960, I worked at Lawson Dairy on MacArthur in 64. You know, in 64, on MacArthur, see a little black guy running, that was me at Lawson Dairy.
Okay.
But across from Walgman.
Yeah, okay.
But what I'm saying, a lot of things, I started in a lot of areas and got out into society quite early, enjoyed some of the same things. People think about outhouses. Outhouses in Crown Point was yet in the 60s, where they didn't have indoor bathrooms. What I'm saying, we make it sound like it's 1,000 years ago. Yeah. This was just almost like yesterday.
That's right.
That's why sometimes we identify what he's talking about. I could probably tell him he run through the alley a little earlier than I did. Mr. Floyd's house had all the fruit trees. I could tell you things to blow your mind that we did. But it's not so much the separation. I think that sometimes in our mind, we separate ourselves mentally. Right. Now, when we get the mindset right, then that person can move forward. Do you agree?
Right.
A lot of time, if you destroy the mind, they say the mind is a trouble thing to waste. And our young people, a lot of times, when they, yes, you can, what's it, Obama? Yes, you can. Right. When we get that mentality, yes, you can, not depending on someone else to let us, but make it happen.
That's right.
And I know each one of you, your success comes because you made it happen. Yeah. You didn't listen to the negative parts of life. And it's all biblical. Yeah. It's all biblical. I mean, what the scriptures say.
There's a parable in the Bible about it everywhere.
Yes. So a man thinketh, so is he.
That's right.
Life and death is where?
In the tongue.
You speak negative, you speak this,
that's right.
And it's going to follow you.
No, you think negative and then you speak negative.
You open the door.
And then you act negative.
Amen.
Yes. The glass has to be half full.
Yes.
Always.
Yes.
You got to be positive.
You have to.
As long as God gives you life, you have to do something positive with that life.
We can look back, but don't stay back. You got to move forward. All right.
Thank you very much.
You got a minute if you want a closing or how to get in touch with you. Or someone needs to get in touch with you. Yeah. I know you're briefly here in our country again.
No. Actually, I'm back and forth now. My wife and I, we still have a home in the Virgin Islands, and we're here. She's from that area, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, so she doesn't tolerate the winter that well. so when it gets cold, we'll go back to the Virgin Islands, but summertime, we're here in Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah, we can get together.
Perhaps we can focus another time on something more concrete. I know we had so many things you want to talk about, but maybe sometimes a little later we can come in and
be happy to
pick out a certain area and focus on that, because education, getting out there. We could talk about that unless we do something ourselves. Yeah. That's why we're here.
Right.
We hope to network enough.
Yeah, we're the old timers. Matter of fact, we went out to Jesse Gooding's house.
That's right.
Myself, Jesse succeeded me, and then Floyd succeeded Jesse as president of the NAACP. I mean,
had all three.
You should have been there then. You're talking about some conversations.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
We needed, and that's when Floyd came. Hey, we got to videotape this. We got to save all of these stories that are telling, and they were some real stories.
You will have a copy. Yeah. We will do a zip drive or something, so we both can have copies of this. Okay. And they can, view it.
Well, we thank both of you for joining us. Like I said, I knew it was going to be interesting. It was going to be so much. Hopefully another time we'll get back, make a date to get back and talk about something again.
All right.
Hello, Dayton. We thank you again, and those that are listening on YouTube. We hope you got a little something there, the scattered remarks and things we tried to bring to you, get you to thinking. God bless you. They have a smile on you is our prayer.